Farmer sees puppy begging to save its mother, but what he does. Antonio Ferreira walked along the dirt road that led to the abandoned reservoir, his leather hat shielding his sunburned face from the stubborn sunset, trying to break through the heavy clouds. For 3 years since losing the family farm to creditors, that solitary walk had become part of his daily routine, a moment where he could think without being bothered by the pitying looks from his neighbors. It was then that he heard the desperate barking coming from the direction of the old reservoir. A golden puppy ran up to him, wet and trembling, raising its small front paws as if begging for help. The animal blocked his path, barking non-stop and running in circles, always returning to the same spot on the road. Antonio tried to shoo it away with gestures, but the puppy persisted, tugging at the hem of his jeans with its small, sharp teeth. "Go away, mutt!" the man grumbled, trying to go on his way. "I don't have time to look after a lost dog." But the puppy didn't give up. It ran to the edge of the reservoir and back, repeating the movement several times until Antonio realized something was wrong. The animal was trying to lead him somewhere specific. Against his will, he decided to follow the little dog to the edge of the reservoir. What he saw there turned his stomach. A golden-coated female dog was trapped among the rocks at the bottom of the dry reservoir, clearly injured and too weak to free herself. She whimpered softly, trying in vain to move. Her right hind leg was visibly hurt, probably broken. "Good Lord," Antonio murmured, carefully climbing down the slippery rocks. "How did you end up down there, poor thing?" The puppy followed him to the edge, barking anxiously as it watched the man approach its mother. Antonio realized it would be impossible to get the dog out by himself. She was too heavy, and the injury prevented her from helping with the rescue. He would need ropes and maybe help from someone else. "Easy there, boy," he said to the puppy, which wouldn't stop whining. "I'll go get what I need to get your mum out of there. You stay here with her, okay?" Antonio climbed back up to the road, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had no money to spare, living off odd jobs in the area since he'd lost everything. But something in the puppy's desperate eyes stopped him from simply walking away and pretending he hadn't seen anything. The walk to town took 40 minutes on foot. Antonio no longer had his own car. He'd sold everything to try to pay off the debts, without success. The streets of São José dos Campos were busy on that Thursday evening, but he walked determinedly toward Mr. Joachim's hardware store. "Good afternoon, Mr. Joachim," he greeted, taking off his hat as he entered the store. Joaquim Mendez looked up from the counter where he was organizing screws, a friendly smile lighting up his wrinkled face of 60-some years. "Antonio! Long time no see, son. How are things?" "Getting by, Mr. Joachim. Listen, I need some sturdy ropes and maybe a small pulley. It's just to borrow, you see if you can trust me. There's a dog trapped in the dry reservoir on the other side of town." Joachim's face flushed with emotion. He had known Antonio since he was a boy, knew the young man's honesty and character. Losing the farm had been an injustice the whole town talked about for months. "Of course, son. Take whatever you need. In fact, do you want me to come along? I have a pickup truck at the shop I can use." Antonio hesitated. His wounded pride made him wary of any help, even from people he'd known for decades. But the urgency of the situation spoke louder. "That would be a huge help, Mr. Joachim. The dog is hurt. We'll need to take her to the vet." As Joachim gathered the necessary materials, Antonio waited outside, watching the movement of the small town. Several people passed by and greeted him respectfully, but he still felt the weight of their pitying looks. Everyone knew his story about the ancestral farm he had lost to an outside investor. "Ready, Antonio, shall we go?" called Joachim, carrying a new rope and some hooks. The old pickup truck rumbled to life and headed down the potholed road toward the reservoir. During the journey, Joachim tried to make conversation about everyday matters, but Antonio only responded with monosyllables, lost in thought. When they arrived at the location, they found a scene that touched both men's hearts. The puppy had gone down to where its mother was and was lying beside her, warming her with its small body. The female dog was now whimpering more softly, visibly weakened. "Poor things," whispered Joachim, grabbing the rope from the truck bed. "Let's get her out of there quickly." The rescue was more complicated than they had imagined. The dog weighed over 20 kilograms and was in a difficult position among the rocks. On the first attempt, the rope slipped and almost injured the animal further. Antonio went down to the bottom of the reservoir, getting his boots wet in the muddy puddles that remained. "Carefully, Joachim," he shouted from below. "She's very weak." They had to improvise a kind of stretcher with the tarp Joachim had in the pickup. The puppy wouldn't stop barking as if wanting to help in some way. After almost an hour of attempts, they finally managed to hoist the injured dog up. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. On the surface, they could examine the injury better. The right hind leg was definitely broken, in addition to several cuts on her body. The dog was breathing with difficulty, but her eyes still shone with life. The puppy immediately ran to its mother, licking her snout affectionately. "We need to take her to Dr. Henrique urgently," said Joachim, referring to the only veterinarian in the region. "His clinic is on the other side of town." "Mr. Joachim, I can't afford a vet visit right now," admitted Antonio, his voice heavy with shame. "Don't worry about that now, my boy. First, let's save the little animal." They placed the dog gently in the bed of the pickup truck, lined with some old blankets. The puppy jumped in to be with its mother, refusing to be away from her even for a moment. Dr. Henrique Silva's veterinary clinic was in an adapted house in the center of São José dos Campos. It was late Thursday afternoon and would normally be closed, but a light on indicated someone was inside. Joachim knocked on the door while Antonio held the puppy, which was whimpering softly. "Dr. Henrique, it's Joachim here. We have an emergency." The door opened to reveal a middle-aged man with graying hair and prescription glasses. Henrique Silva had been a veterinarian in São José dos Campos for over 20 years and knew both Joachim and Antonio well. "What happened?" he asked, already putting on gloves. "A dog trapped in the old reservoir, doctor," explained Joachim. "Broken leg, several cuts." Henrique quickly examined the dog still in the pickup bed. His face turned serious as he assessed the extent of the injuries. "Let's take her inside. I need to run some tests, but I can already tell she'll need surgery on the leg." Antonio felt his stomach sink. Surgery meant high costs. Money he simply didn't have. The puppy followed him into the surgery room, seeming to understand the gravity of the situation. "Dr. Henrique," Antonio began hesitantly, "I need to be honest with you. I can't afford surgery right now." The vet stopped what he was doing and looked Antonio straight in the eyes. They had known each other since Antonio was a child playing on his family's farm, which was near the clinic. "Antonio, you saved my animals several times when I was younger. Remember when my mare got sick and you stayed up 3 nights taking care of her? That was a long time ago, doctor. Not for the heart. Let's take care of the mother dog first, then we'll talk about payment." While Dr. Henrique prepared for surgery, Antonio and Joachim waited in the waiting room with the puppy. The little dog couldn't stay still, pacing back and forth, occasionally stopping to look toward the surgery room. "You know, Antonio," Joachim said, breaking the silence, "my mother always said we're tested by how we treat the most vulnerable. You could have just walked past that puppy today. Anyone would have done the same, Mr. Joachim." "No, son. You know that's not true. A lot of people walk right by, pretending they didn't see." The surgery lasted 2 hours. During that time, other people arrived at the clinic with their animals, and Antonio watched the interactions between owners and pets. An elderly lady brought in an old cat, treating it with the tenderness of someone caring for a child. A young couple arrived, nervous about an injured hamster, clearly in love with the little rodent. When Dr. Henrique finally came out of the surgery room, his face wore a tired but optimistic smile. "The surgery was successful," he announced. "I managed to reconstruct the bone in her leg. She'll need to rest for at least 6 weeks, but she'll be okay." The puppy seemed to understand the words and ran to the door of the recovery room, trying to get to its mother. "Can I see her?" asked Antonio. "Yes, but she's still under anesthesia." The mother dog was sleeping deeply on a padded table, her leg bandaged and suspended by a small traction device. The puppy managed to reach her and lay down beside her, finally calming down. "Dr. Henrique, about the costs," Antonio began again. Look, Antonio, the medicine and materials cost 300 rees, but you can pay for my work whenever you can, and there's one condition. You'll bring both of them here for checkups every week until she's fully recovered. Doctor, I don't know how to thank you. By taking good care of them. And Antonio, if you need help with a place for them to stay during the recovery, I know some people who can help. Antonio knew his housing situation was precarious. He lived in a small borrowed house at the back of an acquaintance's property, without proper conditions to care for 2 dogs, especially an injured one. Joachim, who had overheard the conversation, chimed in. Antonio, my neighbor Mrs. Adelaide lost her husband 6 months ago and has been feeling a bit down. She always wanted a dog, but never had the courage. How about we talk to her? Joachim's suggestion stirred a pang of possessive jealousy in Antonio. In those few hours, he had developed an inexplicable bond with the 2 dogs, especially the brave puppy that had led him to its injured mother. I don't know, Mr. Joachim. What if she doesn't take good care of them? Antonio, Adelaide was a teacher for 40 years. She took care of hundreds of children. I'm sure she'll treat them like her own. Dr. Henrique watched the conversation with interest, sensing Antonio's emotional dilemma. Why don't you talk to her first? He suggested. See if she'd be willing to keep them during the recovery. If it works out, then you can decide what to do. It was almost 9 at night when they left the clinic. The mother dog still needed to stay hospitalized for at least 2 days for post-surgical observation, but the puppy could leave. Antonio carried the little dog in his arms on the way to Adelaide's house. Adelaide Moreira was 68 years old and lived alone in a simple but well-kept house with a grassy backyard that seemed perfect for dogs. Joachim knocked on the door while Antonio stayed a bit back, still holding the puppy. Good evening, Mr. Joachim, greeted the woman, a lady of medium height, with greying hair tied in a bun and blue eyes that were still lively despite her recent sorrow. Good evening, Mrs. Adelaide. Sorry for the hour, but we have a situation here. Joachim quickly explained what had happened, and Adelaide listened with growing attention. When she saw the puppy in Antonio's arms, her eyes filled with tears. Poor little thing, she murmured, reaching out to stroke the little golden head. He must be hungry and scared. The puppy responded to the affection immediately, licking Adelaide's hand and making little happy noises. Mrs. Adelaide, said Antonio, finding his courage, you don't have to accept. I know it's a big responsibility, and Mr. Joachim told me you're going through a difficult time. Antonio, dear, Adelaide replied with a sad smile. Since my Geraldo passed, this house has been too quiet. Maybe a little life in here is exactly what I need. It would just be until his mother recovers, about 6 weeks. And after? The question hung in the air. Antonio hadn't thought about what would happen after. His financial situation wouldn't magically improve in 6 weeks, and he'd still be unable to keep 2 dogs. We'll see, Mrs. Adelaide, one thing at a time. Adelaide invited the men inside. Her house was modest but cozy, with well-preserved old furniture and family photographs decorating the walls. The puppy explored the space curiously, sniffing everything. He'll need dog food, reminded Dr. Henrique, who had joined them, and dewormer, because he probably has worms. I have about 50 reis saved, Adelaide offered. I can buy those things tomorrow. Antonio felt even more ashamed. Not only could he not pay the vet, but now a widowed lady was offering her own money to care for dogs he had found. Mrs. Adelaide, I can't accept that. Antonio, dear, you saved his mother's life. It's the least I can do. Joachim noticed Antonio's discomfort and tried to mediate. How about this? Antonio, you can help Mrs. Adelaide with some chores around her house in exchange for her taking care of the puppy. That way it's fair for everyone. The suggestion seemed to ease the tension a bit. Adelaide had some pending repairs in the yard and on the fence, work that Antonio could easily do. That sounds like a good idea, Adelaide agreed. I have a few things around the house that need fixing. And so, an unofficial agreement was formed between them. Antonio would visit every day to check on the puppy and work on the necessary repairs. Adelaide would care for the animal and provide food and basic care. That first night, Antonio had trouble sleeping. He kept thinking about the puppy and wondering how the mother dog was doing at the clinic. It was strange to care so much about animals that weren't even his. but there was something in that puppy's desperate eyes that had touched him deeply. The next morning, Friday, Antonio woke up earlier than usual and walked to Adelaide's house. He found her in the backyard playing with the puppy, who was chasing an old tennis ball. "Good morning, Mrs. Adelaide. How was the night?" "Good, Antonio." "He slept on the little rug in the kitchen right near my bed. He woke up crying twice, probably missing his mother." The puppy ran to Antonio as soon as he saw him, jumping and enthusiastically licking his hands. It was impossible not to smile at that pure display of joy. "Have you given him a name yet?" "I was thinking Courage," said Adelaide, "because of the bravery he showed yesterday." "Courage. I like it. It suits him." They walked to the veterinary clinic to visit the mother dog. Dr. Henrique informed them that she had spent the night well and was already more alert. When they saw the puppy, the mother dog tried to get up but was prevented by the cast on her leg. "What will her name be?" asked Adelaide. Antonio observed the mother dog for a moment. Despite being injured and weak, there was a dignity in her eyes, an inner strength that impressed him. "Hope," he finally said, "because she didn't give up even though she was trapped down there." "Courage and Hope," repeated Adelaide, smiling. "Beautiful names." During the following days, a routine was established. Antonio spent his mornings working on the repairs at Adelaide's house and his afternoons visiting Hope at the clinic. Courage accompanied him on every trip, becoming his faithful shadow. Hope's recovery was slow but steady. After 5 days in the clinic, Dr. Henrique released her to continue recovering at home, provided she got complete rest. "She can't climb stairs or exert herself," warned the vet, "and she needs to take this medication 3 times a day." Adelaide prepared a special spot in the living room for Hope, with soft cushions and fresh water always nearby. Courage immediately settled in next to his mother, as if it were his duty to protect her. It was during these days of care that Antonio began to notice something special. Adelaide, who used to spend her days in melancholic silence, now had purpose and joy. She constantly talked to the dogs, cared for them with maternal affection, and smiled frequently. "You know, Antonio," she said one Saturday afternoon, watching Courage play in the backyard, "it's been a long time since I've felt so useful. You're doing a lot for them, Mrs. Adelaide." "Actually, they're the ones doing a lot for me." Antonio was beginning to understand what she meant. Taking care of Courage and Hope had given new meaning to her days. She woke up thinking about their well-being, planned activities and care, felt needed again. 2 weeks after the surgery, Dr. Henrique authorized short walks for Hope. Antonio and Adelaide took both dogs for a walk in the central square of São José dos Campos. "Look how well she's doing," observed Adelaide, watching Hope walk slowly but with determination. "The doctor said in another 2 weeks she'll be running normally." During the walk, several people approached to greet Adelaide and meet the dogs. It was clear that their presence in the widow's life was a positive topic of conversation in the small town. Donna Conceição, an old teaching colleague of Adelaide's, stopped to chat. "Adelaide, dear, what beautiful dogs. I didn't know you had adopted." "It's actually a bit complicated, Conceição," explained Adelaide, glancing at Antonio. "I'm taking care of them during their recovery." "And afterwards?" The uncomfortable question again. Antonio realized the 6-week deadline was passing quickly, and he still had no solution for Courage and Hope's future. That night, Adelaide invited him for dinner. It was the first time Antonio had eaten a home-cooked meal in years. During the conversation, she brought up the subject they had both been avoiding. "Antonio, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Mrs. Adelaide." "What do you plan to do when they are completely recovered?" Antonio chewed slowly, thinking about his answer. The truth was he didn't know. His situation hadn't improved at all in the last few weeks. He was still living off odd jobs, with no home of his own or financial stability. "Mrs. Adelaide, I'll be honest. I'm not in a position to take care of 2 dogs, not even one, to tell the truth. What if they stayed here, with me?" The question was asked in a low voice, almost a whisper. Adelaide was looking at her own plate, avoiding Antonio's eyes. "Are you sure, Ma'am? It's a big responsibility, especially as they get older." "Antonio, These last 2 weeks have been the best I've had since my Geraldo passed. Couragem and Esperanza brought life to this house. They brought joy to my heart. Antonio felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because he knew the dogs would be well cared for, but sadness because he had grown deeply attached to them. "But I would like one condition," Adelaide continued. "What?" "That you keep coming here. The dogs like you very much, especially Couragem, and I enjoy your company too." The offer was too generous to be true. Antonio suspected there was something behind all that kindness. "Donna Adelaide, why are you doing this? You barely know me." "Antonio, dear, I was a teacher for 40 years. I learned to see people's character. You are a good man going through a hard time, and sometimes when we help someone, we end up helping ourselves too. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Adelaide's proposal deeply affected Antonio. For years, no one had offered him help without wanting something in return. His experience with losing the farm had made him distrustful and closed off. "Donna Adelaide, I need to think about it more." "Of course, dear, you don't have to decide now." That night, Antonio returned to his small borrowed house with his head buzzing with thoughts. Couragem had followed him to the door and had to be carried back to Adelaide as he refused to be separated from him. Over the weekend, Antonio avoided going to Adelaide's house, claiming other commitments. In truth, he needed time to think without the emotional influence of being near the dogs. It was on a Monday that he received an unexpected visit. Carlos Mendana, the man who had bought his farm at auction, appeared at his door. "Good afternoon, Ferreira," he greeted coldly. "Can we talk?" Carlos was a 50-year-old man, well-dressed, who had arrived in the region 5 years ago buying rural properties at low prices. His reputation wasn't the best among the old local farmers. "What do you want, Mendana?" "I heard you've been taking care of some mutts around here, and that you've set up a kind of informal business with an old widow." Antonio felt anger rising in his chest. How did Carlos know the details about Adelaide and the dogs? "I don't see how that's any of your business." "It is my business because you still owe me money for the farm, and if you have time to play veterinarian, you have time to work and pay me." The statement was technically true. Even after losing the farm at auction, there was still a small amount of debt that Antonio hadn't been able to settle. "Mendana, I'm paying what I can every month." 50 reais is nothing, Ferreira. "I want 300 a month or I'll have to take more drastic measures." "Measures like what?" "I can make your life very complicated in this town, talk to your clients, spread the word that you're not reliable." The threat was not veiled. Carlos had influence in the region and could easily damage the few work opportunities Antonio still had. "I'll see what I can do," he replied through gritted teeth. 2 weeks, Ferreira. I want to see 300 reais in my account, or you'll have problems." After Carlos left, Antonio paced back and forth in his small house, feeling the pressure mount. 300 reais a month was impossible with his current income. He would need to find extra work, maybe even consider leaving town. That's when he remembered Adelaide's offer, not just being close to the dogs, but having a stable place to live and maybe help to overcome his financial difficulties. On Tuesday morning, he went to Adelaide's house with a heavy heart. He found her in the backyard washing Courage, who had gotten dirty playing in the dirt. "Good morning, Miss Adelaide." "Antonio, so good to see you. Courage was a bit sad yesterday. I think he missed you." The puppy, upon seeing Antonio, barked happily and tried to jump out of the bath basin to run to him. "Miss Adelaide, about our conversation last week." "Yes? I accept your proposal, but with one condition as well." "What is it?" "That you let me contribute to the household expenses. Dog food, electricity bill, those kinds of things. I don't want to feel like a parasite." Adelaide smiled with maternal affection. "I accept, dear, but only if you accept living here in the back room. It's been empty since my son got married." The offer was even more generous than Antonio had imagined. A room of his own in an organized and cozy house, far from creditors and threats. "Miss Adelaide, I don't know if—" "Antonio, this house is too big for one person, and with Courage and Hope here, it would be better to have a man around to help when needed." They sealed the deal that same afternoon. Antonio fetched his few belongings and settled into the back room, a simple but clean space with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a small desk. Courage was thrilled with the change. He spent the whole night running between Antonio's room and the living room where Hope rested, as if wanting to make sure everyone was really there. The adjustment was surprisingly easy. Adelaide cooked for both of them. Antonio helped with household chores and caring for the dogs. It was a peaceful routine that neither of them had experienced in a long time. Hope recovered completely after 4 weeks. Dr. Henrique removed the stitches and declared her free for normal activities. To celebrate, they had a picnic in the city park. "Look how well she is," observed Adelaide, watching Hope run after Courage. "It's like she was never hurt," agreed Antonio. "You know, Antonio, I have an idea." "What idea?" "You're very good with animals. Have you ever thought about working with training?" Adelaide's suggestion surprised him. It was true, since childhood he had a knack for dealing with animals, but he had never thought of it as a profession. "Does training pay well?" "My brother-in-law lives in Sao Paulo and pays 200 reais a month for a trainer to take care of his dog. There are many people who need this service." The idea planted a seed in Antonio's mind. If he could get a few clients in the area, maybe he could build a stable income and even pay off his debts to Carlos Mendanha. "But I don't have technical knowledge, Miss Adelaide. I never studied it. Dr. Henrique has some books on canine behavior. I can borrow them for you to study." And so Antonio began studying dog training in his spare time. Adelaide supported him by buying used books and encouraging his experiments with Courage and Hope. The first client appeared by chance. Donna Marlene, Adelaide's neighbor, had a small poodle that barked incessantly and bothered the whole neighborhood. "Antonio, couldn't you take a look at Princinho?" Adelaide asked after a particularly noisy afternoon. "Donna Marlene is desperate." "I don't know if I'm ready for that, Miss Adelaide. You managed to work wonders with Courage. It's worth a try." The first meeting with Princinho was challenging. The poodle was spoiled and disobedient, the result of years of inconsistent treatment by Donna Marlene. But Antonio applied the techniques he had studied, focusing on positive rewards and establishing clear boundaries. After 2 weeks of daily work, Princinho had transformed into an obedient and less anxious dog. Donna Marlene was so impressed that she offered to pay 50 reais for the service and recommended Antonio to other people. "Antonio, you have a special gift," said Adelaide one evening, watching him play with the 3 dogs in the backyard. "I've never seen anyone with so much patience and affection for animals." "Maybe because I kind of identify with them," replied Antonio. "Abandoned, hurt, distrustful animals. I know how it feels." The remark touched Adelaide deeply. She realized that caring for the dogs had been as therapeutic for Antonio as it was for her. Both had found purpose and healing through that special connection. 2 months after the rescue at the pond, Antonio had 5 regular training clients. The income was still modest, but enough to contribute significantly to the household expenses and start paying off his debts. It was on a Thursday afternoon that they received an unexpected visit. A young woman, looking about 25, knocked on Adelaide's door. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for Antonio Ferreira," she said politely. "That's me," replied Antonio, coming from the backyard where he was working with a teenage Labrador. "My name is Carla Mendanha. I'm Carlos Mendanha's daughter." Antonio felt his blood run cold. What was his creditor's daughter doing there? "May I ask what you want?" "Actually, I came to apologize for my father's behavior and to make a proposal." Adelaide, sensing the tension, invited everyone inside for coffee. Carla explained that she was a recently graduated veterinarian and had returned to town to work with Dr. Henrique. "My father told me about the debt you have with him," said Carla, embarrassed, "but I also heard about your work with training. Dr. Henrique speaks very highly of you." "Where are you going with this?" asked Antonio, still suspicious. "I want to propose a partnership. I need someone specialized in animal behavior to work at the clinic. In return, I can help settle your debt with my father." The offer was too tempting to be true. Antonio had learned to be wary of generous offers. "Why would you do this for me?" Because I believe everyone deserves a second chance, and because your talent with animals shouldn't be wasted because of financial problems. Adelaide watched the conversation with growing interest. Carla seemed genuinely concerned about helping and professionally interested in working with Antonio. "What kind of partnership?" asked Adelaide. Antonio would work at the clinic 3 mornings a week, doing behavioral assessments of the animals that come in. Cases of aggression, anxiety, socialization problems. The rest of the time would be free for private clients. And how much would that pay? 400 reais monthly plus commissions for training clients he gets through the clinic. It was an incredible opportunity. With that fixed income, Antonio could not only pay off the debts, but start rebuilding his financial life. "Can I think about it?" "Of course, but I'd like an answer by the end of the week." After Carla left, Adelaide and Antonio spent hours talking about the proposal. The dog seemed to sense the tension and stayed close, as if wanting to offer support. "What do you think, Donna Adelaide?" "I think it's an opportunity that could change your life, Antonio, but the decision is yours." "I'm afraid it might be some kind of trap by Carlos Mendaña. Carla didn't seem like her father to me, and Dr. Henrique is an honest person. He would never get involved in anything dishonest." Antonio spent 2 days reflecting. He watched Courage and Hope playing in the backyard, remembered how it all started with a desperate puppy begging for help. Maybe it was time to accept help too. On Friday morning, he called Carla and accepted the offer. The first day at the clinic was intimidating. Antonio felt out of place in the professional environment, but Carla and Dr. Henrique were patient and encouraging. "Antonio, I want you to evaluate this German Shepherd," said Carla, pointing to a large dog barking aggressively in the cage. "The owners say he gets violent with strangers." Antonio observed the animal for a few minutes before approaching. He realized it wasn't real aggression, but fear and excessive territorial protection. "He's not aggressive," he diagnosed. "He's scared and trying to protect the territory he considers his. With proper socialization and establishing clear leadership, he'll become gentle." Dr. Henrique was impressed with the accuracy of the assessment. Within a few weeks, Antonio had become a key part of the clinic, solving cases that were once considered hopeless. The change in Antonio's life was dramatic. From a lonely and bitter man, he became a respected professional and part of an improvised but solid family. Adelaide, Corajum, and Esperanza had become his true family. 6 months after the rescue at the pond, Antonio managed to pay off all his debts. Carlos Mendaña, surprisingly, showed respect for Antonio's professional growth and even recommended his services to other farmers in the region. "I never thought I'd see the day when Carlos Mendaña would greet me respectfully," Antonio commented to Adelaide on a Sunday afternoon. "People change, Antonio. Sometimes they just need to see they were wrong. Or maybe it's because he no longer has any power over me." Adelaide smiled wisely. Little by little, Antonio was regaining his self-esteem and confidence. It was on a Tuesday afternoon that they received an unexpected call. A journalist from the local newspaper wanted to do a story about Antonio's work with animals. "I don't know if it's a good idea, Donna Adelaide," he said, hesitant. "I don't really like being in the spotlight." "Antonio, your story could inspire other people who are going through hard times. It's worth thinking about." The journalist, Patricia Silva, arrived on Thursday with a photographer. She was a friendly, middle-aged woman who was charmed by the story of overcoming adversity. "Mr. Antonio, what was it like to climb out of rock bottom and rebuild your life?" she asked during the interview. "Actually, I think the one who pulled me out of rock bottom was this little guy here," he replied, stroking Corajum, who was sleeping beside him. "How so?" "When I found Corajum and Esperanza, I was completely closed off from the world. Taking care of them taught me to trust people again, to accept help, to have hope." The story was published in the Sunday edition of the local newspaper, taking up a full page with photos of Antonio working with the dogs. The headline was, "From the Dry Pond to Dreams Fulfilled, the story of Antonio Ferreira's triumph." The response was immediate. Antonio received dozens of calls from people interested in his services, including some farmers from neighboring towns. His schedule filled up in a matter of days. "Antonio, you're going to need help," Adelaide observed, watching him jot down the 20th service inquiry of the week. I'm thinking about that. Maybe hiring an assistant. Or expanding the business. How about opening a training school? The idea was ambitious but not impossible. With the growing demand and his established reputation, Antonio could really think bigger. It was Dr. Henrique who suggested the perfect location, an abandoned shed behind the clinic that could be renovated to serve as a training center. It's big enough for several activities at once, the veterinarian explained, and it's close to the clinic, making it easier to integrate the services. Antonio visited the shed and was excited by the possibilities. It was a spacious area that, with some renovations, could house up to 20 dogs at once. Dr. Henrique, how much would it cost to rent this space? Antonio, how about a partnership? You renovate and use the warehouse, and I'll take 15% of the profits. That way we share the risks. It was a fair and beneficial proposal for both. Antonio accepted immediately and began making plans for the renovation. Adelaide got excited about the project and offered to help with the administrative side of the business. Antonio, I can handle the schedule, budgets, those kinds of things. I'm organized and have experience with school administration. Mrs. Adelaide, I don't want you to overburden yourself. Nonsense, dear. It would be a pleasure to be part of this dream. The warehouse renovations took 2 months. Antonio did most of the manual labor, hiring only an electrician and a plumber for the specialized work. Adelaide coordinated the materials and supervised the progress. Coragium and Esperanza followed the whole process, as if they understood that this project was important for their human family. Esperanza, in particular, showed a protective instinct toward the place, barking at strangers who approached. The inauguration of the Esperanza e Coragium Training Center took place on a sunny Saturday morning. Old clients, new prospects, Dr. Henrique, Carla, Joaquim, and several people from the community attended. Antonio, said Adelaide during the simple ceremony, look around, see how many people came to celebrate your success. It was true. The lonely, bitter man from a year ago was now surrounded by genuine friends and admirers. His transformation had been as profound as Esperanza's recovery from surgery. The first basic training course began the following Monday with 8 students and their respective dogs. Antonio discovered he enjoyed teaching and had a natural talent for conveying knowledge. The first rule of training, he explained to the class, is patience. Dogs learn at their own pace, not ours. One of the students was Beatriz Santos, a 70-year-old retiree who had adopted an adult mixed-breed dog and couldn't control him. Teacher Antonio, my Bingo is very stubborn. Sometimes I think he doesn't want to learn. Mrs. Beatriz, all dogs want to please their owners. Sometimes the problem is in the communication, not the willingness. During the classes, Antonio used Coragium and Esperanza as models. The two had become exemplary dogs, obedient but not subservient, affectionate but respectful. See how Esperanza waits for my permission before taking the treat, he demonstrated for the students. That's self-control, not fear. The center's success exceeded expectations. Within 6 months, Antonio had 3 simultaneous classes and a 2-month waiting list. The monthly income surpassed 3,000 reais, an amount he never imagined he would earn again. It was Adelaide who suggested the next expansion. Antonio, how about we offer a dog boarding service? Many people need to travel and have nowhere to leave their pets. The idea made sense. The center had the space and suitable facilities, plus the trust of already established clients. It would be a lot of work, Mrs. Adelaide. We can hire staff. Carla knows some qualified people. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The expansion into a canine hotel happened 6 months later. Antonio hired 2 employees, Leticia, a 20-year-old young woman passionate about animals, and Vera, a 50-year-old lady who had lost her job at a factory in town. Girls, here every dog is treated as if it were our own, Antonio explained on their first day of work. Affection, attention, and respect are fundamental. The hotel was an immediate success. Clients started bringing their dogs even when they weren't traveling, just so the animals could socialize and get proper exercise. It was during this period of growth that Antonio received a call that would change everything again. "Hello, is this Antonio?" "Yes, who's speaking?" "This is Roberto Silva from the São José dos Campos City Hall. We have an interesting proposal for you." Roberto explained that the city was creating a municipal responsible adoption program and needed a canine behavior specialist to coordinate the project. "Mr. Antonio, we know your work through Dr. Henrique. We'd like to hire you as a consultant. What kind of work would it be? Evaluating abandoned dogs that arrive at the municipal shelter, preparing adoptability reports, training staff and volunteers. And what would the pay be? 2,000 reais per month for 20 hours of work per week. It was an incredible opportunity to make a difference in the lives of many abandoned animals, besides representing definitive financial stability. "I need to talk to my family," Antonio replied, surprising himself by using that word. Adelaide was overjoyed at the news. "Antonio, you're going to help hundreds of animals. It's the complete fulfillment of your purpose." "Miss Adelaide, do you think I can handle everything? The center, the hotel, and now this?" "Dear, you started from nothing and built an empire. Of course you can." Antonio accepted the city's proposal and started working at the municipal shelter. The place was depressing. Dozens of dogs in small cages, unmotivated staff, and a very low adoption rate. "My first diagnosis," he reported to the Secretary of the Environment, "is that many of these dogs were poorly evaluated. Several labeled as aggressive are just scared or poorly socialized. Can you give examples? This Rottweiler here is marked as dangerous, but he's actually just territorial and protective. With proper training, he'd be an excellent family dog." Antonio implemented a new behavioral assessment system that tripled the adoption rate in 6 months. Dogs once considered unadoptable found loving families after rehabilitation work. The success story caught the attention of the regional media. A TV station from São Paulo did a special report on the municipal program and Antonio's work. "Mr. Antonio, what's the secret to your success with problem animals?" asked the reporter. "There's no such thing as a problem animal, only a misunderstood one," he replied, with courage sleeping in his lap during the interview. "Every dog wants to love and be loved. Sometimes they just need someone to believe in them." The reporter was visibly moved by the answer and by Antonio's transformation story. "And how did it all begin?" "With this little one here," he said, petting Courage, "a desperate puppy who taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's courage." The report aired on a Sunday night and had a national impact. Antonio received calls from several cities interested in implementing similar programs. 2 years after the rescue at the pond, Antonio was recognized as a canine behavior specialist throughout the state. He received invitations for lectures, consultations, and even offers to write books. But what made him most proud was the family he had formed. Adelaide had become his heart's mother, Courage and Hope his 4-legged children, and the center's staff his extended family. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon that Adelaide brought up a delicate subject. "Antonio, I need to talk to you about something." "Go ahead, Miss Adelaide. I'm thinking of making a will leaving the house to you." Antonio was shocked by the statement. "Miss Adelaide, you're still young and healthy. Why are you thinking about this?" "I'm 70 years old, dear, and you are the most important person in my life. This house is as much yours as it is mine. But you have children, grandchildren, who visit me twice a year and have never shown real interest in me. You gave me a new life, Antonio." The conversation left Antonio deeply moved. He never imagined that caring for 2 abandoned dogs would lead him to find a true family. That same week he received a call from São Paulo. A large pet store chain wanted to hire him as a national consultant to develop training programs. "Mr. Antonio, our offer is 10,000 reais per month plus benefits," the executive explained. "You would work on developing methodologies for our 50 stores across Brazil." It was an amount of money that would completely change his financial life, but it would mean traveling constantly and leaving São José dos Campos. "I need to think about it," he replied. "Of course, but we need an answer by the end of the month." For a week, Antonio was torn. The opportunity was incredible professionally and financially, but it would mean leaving behind everything he had built. It was Adelaide who helped him find the answer. Antonio, what is your biggest professional dream? To help as many abandoned animals as possible. And where can you make the biggest difference? In a private company or here, developing projects for the public sector? The question clarified everything. Antonio called São Paulo and politely declined the offer, explaining that his mission was in São José dos Campos. Instead, he decided to expand his work in the city even further. He proposed to the City Hall the creation of a municipal training and adoption center that would be a national model. Mayor, I imagine a place where families can meet available dogs, take basic training classes, and receive post-adoption follow-up. Antonio, I love the idea, but where would we find the resources for a project of this size? I can look for partnerships with companies, NGOs, and even the state government. The important thing is to start. The municipal center project took a year to get off the ground, but when it was finished, it was truly impressive. It occupied a 2-hectare plot at the entrance to the city with socialization areas, classrooms, veterinary offices, and event spaces. The inauguration was attended by the state governor and broadcast live on local TV. Antonio made sure courage and hope were present. After all, they were the true reason for everything. Governor, he said during his speech, this center only exists because a brave puppy didn't give up on saving his mother, and because an entire community believed it's worth helping those in need. The governor was so impressed that he immediately announced the creation of a statewide program based on the São José dos Campos model. Mr. Antonio, would you like to coordinate the implementation of this program in other cities? It was another opportunity to expand his impact, this time with official government support. I accept, but on one condition: my operational base remains in São José dos Campos. Perfect. You will be our state coordinator for the responsible adoption program. 3 years after the rescue at the pond, Antonio was responsible for adoption programs in 15 cities in the interior of São Paulo. More than 1,000 dogs had found families through the projects he coordinated, but none of it would have happened without Adelaide, who remained his life companion and business partner. At 72, she was more active than many young people, helping to manage all the projects. Donna Adelaide, sometimes I think about what my life would have been like if I hadn't found courage that day. It would have been completely different, dear, but fate has its ways. Do you believe in fate? I believe in love, and love always finds a way to show itself. Courage, now a 4-year-old adult dog, remained the perfect model of obedience and affection. Hope, despite a slight residual limp from her surgery, was an active and maternal dog who helped train orphaned puppies. It was on a Tuesday morning that Adelaide fainted in the kitchen while making coffee. Antonio found her collapsed on the floor, with Courage barking desperately to get attention. "Mrs. Adelaide, Mrs. Adelaide," he shouted, checking if she was breathing. They rushed her to the hospital where doctors diagnosed a severe cardiac arrhythmia that would require surgery. "Dr. Roberto, will she be okay?" Antonio asked the cardiologist. "It's a delicate surgery, especially at her age, but she has a good chance of success." During the 3 days Adelaide was hospitalized, Antonio never left the hospital. Courage and Hope also seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation and remained quiet and close by. The surgery was successful, but the recovery would be long. Adelaide would need complete rest for at least 2 months. "Antonio, you'll have to take care of everything by yourself for a while," she said from her hospital bed. "Mrs. Adelaide, don't worry about that. The important thing is for you to recover. I'm afraid of being a burden to you. Mrs. Adelaide, you took care of me when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to take care of you." Adelaide's recovery was slow but steady. Antonio hired extra staff to run the business, while he dedicated himself to her care. Courage and Hope took turns keeping the lady company, as if they knew she needed special affection. It was during this period that Antonio realized how much Adelaide meant to him. It wasn't just gratitude for helping him, but genuine filial love. She was the mother he had chosen to have, just as he was the son she had chosen. After 2 months of recovery, Adelaide was almost completely restored. To celebrate, they organized a Thanksgiving party at the community center, gathering all their friends and employees. "Antonio," Adelaide said during her brief speech, 4 years ago, I was a lonely and depressed widow. Today, I am the happiest woman in the world, surrounded by a family I love. Mrs. Adelaide, you transformed my life as much as I transformed yours. No, dear. The ones who transformed our lives were these two here, she said, pointing to Courage and Hope. They brought us together. It was true. 2 abandoned dogs had been the catalyst for a transformation that benefited hundreds of other animals and dozens of people. 5 years after the rescue at the pond, the program coordinated by Antonio was present in 50 cities in São Paulo state and served as a model for other states. He had become a national reference in responsible adoption and behavioral rehabilitation. But what made him most proud was the home he had built with Adelaide and their dogs. On Sunday evenings, sitting on the porch watching Courage and Hope play in the backyard, Antonio reflected on the mysterious paths of life. You know, Mrs. Adelaide, sometimes I think that Puppy saved me more than I saved him. How so, dear? When I found Courage that day, I was lost, bitter, without hope. Taking care of him and Hope taught me to love again, to trust, to have purpose. And to accept help, Adelaide added. That was crucial for your recovery. Exactly. I learned that being strong doesn't mean doing everything alone, but knowing when to ask for and accept help. The lesson had spread to every aspect of his life. At work, he had formed a solid team of collaborators. In his personal life, he had cultivated true friendships. And in family, he had found unconditional love. It was on a Saturday afternoon, 6 years after the rescue, that they received an unexpected visit. A young family knocked on the door, holding a golden retriever puppy. "Mr. Antonio," asked the man, "my name is Ricardo Santos. This is my son Gabriel and my wife, Fernanda. We wanted to meet in person the man who saved our dogs." Antonio didn't understand right away. "Your dogs?" "Hope is the mother of our Duke here," Fernanda explained. "She had a litter 2 years ago, and we adopted a puppy through the city program. And Gabriel here has been insisting he wants to meet Grandma Hope," Ricardo added. Antonio was moved. Hope had had puppies 2 years ago, but he never imagined any of the adopters would discover the mother's identity. "How did you find us?" "Dr. Henrique told us the whole story," Fernanda explained. "Gabriel was fascinated and wants Duke to meet his family." Hope, upon seeing the young puppy, immediately showed maternal recognition. She licked Duke affectionately, while Courage watched curiously. "It's so moving to see our family keeps growing," Adelaide remarked. The Santos family's visit brought a new perspective on the impact of their work. It wasn't just about saving individual animals, but about creating networks of love and care that spread through the community. During afternoon tea, Gabriel, an 8-year-old boy, asked a question that touched Antonio deeply. "Mr. Antonio, why did you save Grandma Hope?" "Actually, Gabriel, I think she saved me." "How so?" "When I found your Grandma Hope and Grandpa Courage, I was very sad and lonely. Taking care of them taught me how to be happy again. Just like Duke did for me," the boy exclaimed. "Before him, I was afraid of everything. Now I'm brave." The comparison was perfect. Just as the dogs had transformed Antonio and Adelaide's lives, they kept transforming other lives through their generations. That night after the Santos family left, Antonio kept thinking about legacies and continuity. What had started as a desperate rescue had become a movement touching hundreds of lives. "Mrs. Adelaide, how about we create a special program for children?" "What kind of program?" "Teaching responsibility and empathy through animal care, a partnership between schools and the city centre." "Antonio, that's a brilliant idea. A child who learns to care for an animal from a young age grows up more humane." The educational program, Four-Legged Friends, was launched 6 months later, serving 10 city schools. Children visited the centre weekly to learn about basic care, animal behaviour and social responsibility. Gabriel Santos was one of the first to enroll and became one of the most dedicated students. His transformation from a shy child into a confident leader inspired other participants. "Teacher Marina," Gabriel said during a class, "can I adopt a puppy when I grow up?" "Of course, Gabriel, but first you need to be well prepared. How about we start by teaching you to care for a dog here at the center? The program was so successful that other cities began requesting consultations to implement similar versions. Antonio realized he had created something bigger than a business, a social movement. 7 years after the rescue at the reservoir, Antonio was invited to give a lecture at the University of São Paulo on social innovation and community impact. "Students," he said to an audience of 200 people, "sometimes the biggest transformations start with the simplest gestures. My life changed because I stopped to listen to a puppy's cry for help." "Professor Antonio," a student asked, "what's the secret to creating lasting social impact?" "Start small, but think big. And never forget that behind every problem, there's a human story that deserves attention." After the lecture, several students approached him, interested in internships with the programs in São José dos Campos. Antonio realized he was shaping the next generation of professionals committed to animal welfare. Returning home that night, he found Adelaide on the porch watching Courage and Hope sleeping peacefully on the rug. "How was the lecture?" she asked. "Good. But what impressed me most was seeing young people so interested in making a difference in the world. You reap what you sow, Antonio. Your passion inspires others." "Our passion, Miss Adelaide. None of this would exist if you hadn't given me a chance." "Antonio, you still don't get it, do you? We saved each other. Courage and Hope were just the four-legged cupids God sent." Adelaide's observation made him reflect on life's mysteries. How had a chance encounter on a dusty road resulted in such profound transformation for so many people? It was on a Sunday morning, 8 years after the rescue, that Adelaide made an unexpected announcement. "Antonio, I got a call from a publisher in São Paulo. They want to publish our story in a book." "Our story?" "The journalist who wrote that article 2 years ago has written a book about stories of overcoming adversity. Our story would be the main chapter." "I'm not sure I want my private life exposed like that, Miss Adelaide." "Think of the good it could do, dear. How many people might be inspired and change their own lives?" The publisher sent a preliminary copy of the book, titled Four-Legged Heroes, Stories That Transform Lives. The chapter about Antonio was 40 pages long and deeply moving. After much thought, Antonio authorized the publication, on the condition that part of the royalties would go to the city's adoption programs. The book launch took place at the Municipal Center, in a ceremony that brought together officials, friends, and dozens of families who had adopted dogs through the programs. "Antonio," the mayor said during the event, "your story proves that one determined person can change an entire community." "Mr. Mayor, I just followed the example of courage a puppy gave me." The book became a regional bestseller and took the story of São José dos Campos to all of Brazil. Antonio began receiving invitations to give lectures in other cities and even other countries. It was during a trip to give a lecture in Buenos Aires that he received an urgent call from Dr. Henrique. "Antonio, you need to come back immediately. Adelaide is unwell again." The flight back to Brazil was agony. Antonio couldn't stop thinking he might lose the most important person in his life. Courage and Hope seemed to sense his anguish and stayed glued to him the entire way from the airport to the hospital. Adelaide had suffered another heart problem, more serious than the previous one. The doctors were clear. She would need a pacemaker and significant lifestyle changes. "Miss Adelaide, I'll cancel all the lectures. My place is here by your side." "Antonio, absolutely not. Your work is too important to stop because of me." "You are more important than any work. Dear, I'm a 74-year-old woman who has already lived longer than I expected. You have a mission to fulfill." The surgery to implant the pacemaker was successful, but left Adelaide more fragile. She would need constant care and could no longer actively participate in running the business. Antonio hired a nurse to be with Adelaide during the day and completely reorganized his schedule to be more present at home. "You know, Antonio," Adelaide said on a quiet afternoon, "I'm not afraid of passing on. My only worry is leaving you alone." "Miss Adelaide, please don't talk like that. It's reality, dear, but I want you to know that these years by your side have been the best of my life. You gave me purpose, joy, and a son's love. You have also been the best mother I could have had, And courage and hope will keep looking after you when I'm no longer here." As if they understood the conversation, the two dogs approached and lay down beside Adelaide, offering their silent affection. 9 years after the rescue at the reservoir, Adelaide celebrated her 75th birthday at an intimate party with her closest friends. Despite her physical frailty, her spirit remained strong and joyful. "Antonio," she said during the toast, "thank you for giving me the best years of my life, and thank you for continuing the mission we started together. Mrs. Adelaide, you are the reason all of this exists." "No, dear. The reason is these two here," she pointed to Courage and Hope. "They taught us that true love is unconditional, and that it's always worth fighting for those we love." The party was emotional, but everyone noticed that Adelaide was gently saying goodbye to her active social life. In the following weeks, she began spending more time at home, content to watch the town centre's activity through the window. It was on a quiet spring morning that Adelaide woke up weaker than usual. Antonio immediately sensed something was different. "Mrs. Adelaide, how are you feeling?" "Tired, Antonio, very tired. Should we go to the hospital?" "No, dear. I want to stay here, at home with our family." Dr. Henrique came to the house and, after examining Adelaide, spoke privately with Antonio. "Antonio, her heart is very weak. It could be a matter of days." "Does she know?" "I think so. She's a wise woman." Antonio spent the following days by Adelaide's side, talking about happy memories and future plans for the programs. Courage and Hope never left the room, as if they wanted to offer all the affection possible. "Antonio," Adelaide said on a golden afternoon, "promise me one thing?" "Anything, Mrs. Adelaide." "Keep helping abandoned animals, and when you find others like you and me, people who are alone and hurt, offer them the same chance we gave each other." "I promise, Mrs. Adelaide, and don't stay alone for the rest of your life. Find someone special to share this journey with. Mrs. Adelaide." "Antonio, love doesn't shrink when it's shared, it grows. You have enough love to care for many people." Adelaide fell asleep the next morning and did not wake up. She passed peacefully, surrounded by the love of her chosen family. Adelaide's wake was a demonstration of the impact she had made on the community. Hundreds of people attended to pay their last respects to the woman who had dedicated the last years of her life to caring for animals in need. "Adelaide Moreira wasn't just a volunteer," the mayor said during the ceremony. "She was the heart of our social programs. Without her, none of this would exist." Antonio could barely speak from emotion, but he insisted on paying his tribute. "Mrs. Adelaide taught me that family is who we choose to love and care for. She chose to love me when I was worth nothing, and that changed my life forever." After the burial, Antonio returned to a home that felt empty for the first time in years. Courage and Hope also seemed to feel Adelaide's absence and remained quiet and close by. The following weeks were difficult. Antonio tried to maintain a normal routine, but deeply missed Adelaide's companionship and wisdom. It was Carla, now a partner at the veterinary clinic, who helped him deal with the grief. "Antonio, Adelaide wouldn't want to see you isolating yourself like this," she said one afternoon. "She wanted you to continue your mission. It's hard, Carla. I feel like I've lost my mother." And you have. But she left an incredible legacy that needs to keep growing. It was during a visit to Adelaide's grave that Antonio made an important decision. Reading the simple tombstone with the words, "Adelaide Moreira, heart mother to many," he decided to expand even further the work they had built together. "Donna Adelaide," he said, kneeling before the grave, "I'm going to turn our house into the first temporary home for people who have lost everything, just like what happened to me, a place where they can recover and rebuild their lives." Courage and Hope seemed to approve of the idea as they ran through the cemetery as if wanting to celebrate. 10 years after the rescue at the reservoir, Antonio inaugurated the Adelaide Moreira House, a temporary home for people in socially vulnerable situations. The old house where he lived with Adelaide was adapted to host up to 6 people at a time. "The idea," he explained during the inauguration, "is to offer not just shelter, but an opportunity for rebuilding. Every person who arrives here will have support to find work, take care of their health, and rebuild their dignity." The first guest was Carlos, a 40-year-old man who had lost his job and home after an accident left him temporarily disabled. Antonio, I don't know how to thank you, Carlos said on the first night. No need to thank me. Just promise to help the next person when your situation improves. How do you know it will improve? Because I've been in your place. And because Donna Adelaide taught me that there is always hope, even when it seems there isn't. The Adelaide House program was so successful that other cities began requesting consultations to implement similar projects. Antonio realized he had created a replicable model for social transformation. During this period, he met Marina Silva, a 35-year-old psychologist who came to work as a volunteer at Adelaide House. She had just gone through a divorce and was seeking a new purpose in life. Marina, Antonio said during her first day of work, here every person has a story of pain but also of hope. Our role is to help rebuild that hope. I understand. And how did you develop this sensitivity? I learned from the one who understood it best, he replied, petting Courage. This little one here taught me that we should never give up on those we love. Marina was intrigued by Antonio's story and asked to hear all the details. During long evening conversations on the porch of Adelaide House, he told her about the rescue at the reservoir, his partnership with Adelaide, and the entire journey of transformation. It's an incredible story, Marina remarked. You literally built an empire of love and solidarity from a chance encounter. It wasn't chance, Antonio corrected. It was necessary. I needed to find courage and hope as much as they needed to be found. Do you believe in destiny? I believe in purpose, and I believe that sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be. The friendship between Antonio and Marina grew naturally. She admired his dedication and sensitivity, while he appreciated her intelligence and passion for helping people. Marina, may I ask why you decided to work here? He asked one afternoon. Because after my divorce I felt lost and without purpose. Working here reminded me why I chose to be a psychologist. And what was the reason? To help people find the strength to overcome their difficulties, just like you did for me without even knowing it. The observation touched Antonio deeply. He hadn't realized that his example was inspiring Marina to rebuild her own life. It was during an adoption fair at the municipal center that something changed between them. Marina was helping a family choose a puppy when Antonio observed how naturally she interacted with the children and animals. She would be a wonderful mother, he thought, surprising himself with the thought. That night, during his usual walk with Courage and Hope, Antonio caught himself thinking about Marina more than usual. Was he developing feelings for her? The answer came one Saturday morning. Marina arrived earlier than usual at Casa Adelaide and found Antonio in the backyard playing with the dogs. "Good morning," she greeted, smiling in a different way. "Good morning, Marina. You're early today." "It's just... well, I wanted to talk to you about something." Antonio's heart raced. Was she leaving? Had she gotten another job? "Antonio, these months working by your side have been the best of my life. You helped me find a new purpose. I'm happy to hear that. But there's one more thing. I've fallen in love with you, with your work, with this life you've built here." Antonio was speechless. It had been a long time since he'd felt butterflies in his stomach. "Marina, I've also developed special feelings for you, but I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of ruining our friendship, of not being the man you deserve, of—" Marina interrupted him with a gentle kiss, while Courage and Hope ran around them as if wanting to celebrate. "Antonio, love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to care for each other every day." Antonio and Marina's courtship was a natural extension of the professional partnership they had developed. She moved into the main house, while Casa Adelaide continued operating in the back of the property. "You know, Marina," Antonio said one night, watching the stars from the porch, "Donna Adelaide predicted this." "What?" "That I would find someone special to share this journey with. She said I had enough love to care for many people." She was right, and I'm sure she's happy for us. A year later, Antonio proposed to Marina during an adoption ceremony at the municipal center. In front of dozens of families who had found their dogs through the programs, he knelt with a simple ring. "Marina, do you want to build a family with me? To care together for those who need love?" "Yes," she answered, moved. The wedding took place in the same place where it all began, near the old reservoir, now transformed into a beautiful lake with a commemorative plaque telling the story of courage and hope. The ceremony was simple but emotional, with the presence of all the friends Antonio had made along the journey. Courage served as the ring-bearer, while Hope carried a small bouquet of flowers in his muzzle. "Antonio and Marina," said the officiant, "may your love continue to grow and multiply kindness in the world, just as the story of courage and hope multiplied hope in our community." 12 years after the rescue at the reservoir, Antonio and Marina received a phone call that would once again change their lives. "Mr. Antonio, this is the Nobel Social Foundation. We would like to nominate you for the International Social Innovation Prize." International prize? Your work has created a replicable model that has already been implemented in 200 Brazilian cities and is being studied in other countries. It's an impressive social transformation. The news was unbelievable. What had started as a desperate rescue had become an international movement. "But I need to clarify one thing," said Antonio. "I didn't create anything alone. I had help from many special people, especially a lady named Adelaide Moreira." "Of course, Mr. Antonio, we know the full story." The prize recognizes exactly that, how small gestures can create big transformations when done with genuine love. The award ceremony would take place in Geneva, Switzerland. It was the first time Antonio would leave Brazil, and he made sure to bring a photo of Adelaide, plus the collars of courage and hope as talismans. "Marina, I'm nervous," he confessed on the plane. "Why? You deserve all the recognition." "I don't know if I deserve it. I just did what anyone would do." "Antonio, that's exactly why you deserve it. Your humility and genuineness are part of what makes your work special." The ceremony was grand, with world leaders and social activists from various countries. When it was his turn to speak, Antonio took the stage with Adelaide's photo in his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, visibly moved, "this award is not mine. It belongs to a dog named Hope, who didn't give up even when hurt, a puppy named Courage who asked for help when he needed it, and a woman named Adelaide who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." The auditorium fell into absolute silence. My story proves that none of us needs to be a hero to make a difference. We just need to have the courage to stop and listen when someone asks for help. We need to have hope that it's always possible to start over, and we need to have enough love to offer a second chance. The audience rose in a 5-minute emotional standing ovation. Many people cried openly, touched by the simplicity and depth of the message. After the ceremony, dozens of international organizations approached Antonio, interested in implementing versions of the Brazilian model in their countries. It was the definitive recognition that small gestures really can change the world. Back in Brazil, Antonio found Courage and Hope visibly older, but still full of affection and loyalty. Courage, now 12, limped slightly due to arthritis, but remained the same faithful companion as always. "Hi, my boys," he said, kneeling to receive their welcoming licks. "Daddy brought you an award." Hope, at 15, was even slower, but her eyes still shone with intelligence and love. She had become the respected matriarch of the center, teaching orphaned puppies how to behave. It was around this time that Marina gave Antonio news that filled him with joy. "Honey, I'm pregnant." "Really?" he asked, incredulous. 2 months. Do you think Courage and Hope will accept a human baby in the family?" "I'm sure they will. They've always loved children." Marina's pregnancy brought a new dimension to their lives. Courage and Hope seemed to understand something special was happening and became even more protective of her. Antonio decided to slow down his work pace a bit, to dedicate more time to his growing family. He handed over the executive coordination of the programs to an experienced team, keeping only general supervision. "Marina, I want to be present for every moment of our child's upbringing. I don't want to be an absent father. And what values do we want to pass on to him or her? Compassion, the courage to help those in need, and unconditional love for all living beings." The baby was born on a sunny spring morning. It was a boy named Gabriel, in honor of the little boy from the Santos family who had inspired Antonio so much. "Look, boys," said Antonio, introducing Gabriel to Courage and Hope at the hospital. "This is our son. Will you help take care of him?" The two dogs sniffed the baby delicately and immediately assumed protective positions. From that moment on, Gabriel would never be without canine supervision. 15 years after the rescue at the reservoir, the family had grown and become even more solid. Gabriel, now 2 years old, already showed a special love for animals and followed Courage and Hope around the house as if they were his older siblings. It was on a quiet afternoon that Hope, now 17, lay down on the living room rug and could no longer get up on her own. Dr. Henrique, urgently called, confirmed what everyone feared. "Antonio, she is at the end of her life. There's nothing more we can do medically." "How long?" "Maybe a few days, but without suffering, she will pass in her sleep." Antonio cancelled all his appointments and stayed by Hope's side during her final days. Courage never left his companion's side for a moment, lying next to her as he had since he was a puppy. "Thank you, girl," whispered Antonio, stroking Esperanza's head. "Thank you for changing my life, for teaching me what unconditional love is." Esperanza passed on a quiet morning, asleep in Antonio's lap, with Courage gently licking her ears. It was a peaceful farewell for a life that had been a symbol of resilience and love. Esperanza's burial took place in the municipal center's garden, under a tree they had planted years before. Dozens of people came to say goodbye to the dog, who had become a symbol of hope for the entire community. "Esperanza taught us that it's always possible to start over," said Antonio during the tribute. "That wounds can heal and that true love is never wasted." Gabriel, even though he was little, seemed to understand the sadness of the moment and offered his stuffed teddy bear to be buried with Esperanza. Courage felt the loss of his lifelong companion deeply. He spent weeks looking for her around the house and sleeping in the spot where she used to rest. "He's grieving," Marina explained to Gabriel, "just like we are." "Is Courage sad because he loves Grandma Esperanza?" "That's right, son, and it's normal to be sad when we lose someone we love." 2 years after Esperanza's passing, Courage also began to show signs of old age. At 17, he walked slowly and slept most of the time, but he remained affectionate, especially with Gabriel. "Daddy," asked Gabriel, now 4 years old, "is Courage going to travel like Grandma Esperanza did?" "Probably, son. But look at all the love he's given us all these years. That will never end." "And will he teach it to other children up in heaven?" The innocence of the question moved Antonio. Through Gabriel's eyes, he realized the story of Courage and Esperanza would live on for generations to come. Courage passed on a Sunday afternoon, sleeping peacefully in Gabriel's lap while the family was gathered on the porch. It was a gentle farewell for the brave dog who had changed so many lives. "Goodbye, Courage," whispered Gabriel, kissing the dog's head. "Thank you for taking care of our family." Courage was buried next to Esperanza's grave, reuniting the canine family for eternity. The ceremony was even larger than Esperanza's, with municipal officials and hundreds of people who had been touched by their story. "Courage taught us that being afraid isn't the problem," said Antonio. "The problem is letting fear stop us from doing what's right." 20 years after the rescue at the reservoir, Antonio was on his porch watching Gabriel play in the yard with Luna, a golden retriever puppy they had recently adopted. "Marina, can you believe it's been 20 years since it all began? Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels like a whole lifetime." It was a whole lifetime, the life I should have lived from the beginning. The municipal center had become a global reference for responsible adoption and social rehabilitation. Over 5,000 animals had found homes through its programs, and 300 people had been helped at Casa Adelaide. "Daddy," called Gabriel, running up to them, "my teacher at school said you're famous all over the world." "I'm not famous, son. I was just lucky to find Courage and Esperanza when I needed them most." "And they were lucky to find you," Marina added. "Actually," said Gabriel, with the early wisdom only children possess, "I think you all found each other because God wanted you to be a family." His son's observation touched Antonio deeply. Maybe Gabriel was right. Maybe everything had been planned from the start. The meeting at the reservoir, Adelaide's help, the building of a new life. That night, Antonio walked to the graves of Courage and Hope in the garden at the center. It was a peaceful spot, decorated with flowers and a plaque that briefly told their story. "Boys," he said, kneeling before the graves, "thank you for everything. For teaching me to love, to trust, to have hope. For giving me a family and a purpose." A gentle breeze rustled the flowers planted over the graves, as if Courage and Hope were whispering a loving reply. Back at home, Antonio found Marina putting Gabriel to sleep. Luna was lying at the foot of the boy's bed, already naturally assuming her role as protector. "He fell asleep talking about courage and hope again," said Marina. "I think that story is going to be passed down from generation to generation. I hope so. I hope Gabriel grows up knowing it's always worth helping those in need. I'm sure he will. He's learning from your example." Antonio looked out the bedroom window toward the municipal center, where dozens of dogs were waiting for adoptive families. The next day, probably some of those love stories would begin, continuing the cycle of care and hope. "You know, Marina, sometimes I think our life is too good to be true." "Why?" "Because it started with so much suffering and turned into so much joy." "Maybe that's exactly why it is true. The best stories are the ones where love overcomes all difficulties." Luna lifted her head from the foot of Gabriel's bed and looked at Antonio, as if she wanted to say something. For a moment, he saw in the puppy's eyes the same determined sparkle he had seen in Courage 20 years earlier. "You're going to carry on the tradition, aren't you, girl?" he whispered, petting Luna. The puppy licked his hand affectionately, as if accepting the responsibility of caring for the family's new generation. 25 years after the rescue at the pond, Antonio turned 60, surrounded by a family he never imagined he would have. Gabriel, now 9 years old, helped at the municipal center every Saturday, showing the same passion for animals that his father had developed. "Dad, when I grow up, I want to work with you," Gabriel said one morning. "Why, son?" "Because you teach people to love, and I think the world needs more love." Gabriel's simple but profound answer perfectly summed up the legacy Antonio had built. It wasn't just about saving animals or helping people in need. It was about teaching the world to love unconditionally. Marina, now pregnant with their second child, watched father and son working together at the center and smiled, certain they were building something eternal. "This family has been blessed," she thought, "and our mission is to spread those blessings to other people." The center had become a small town dedicated to animal and human well-being. In addition to the original facilities, it now included a veterinary school, an animal hospital, housing for staff, and Casa Adelaide, which had expanded to accommodate up to 20 people at a time. It was on a summer afternoon that special news arrived. The federal government had decided to turn the São José dos Campos model into a national program, bringing the methodology to all Brazilian state capitals. "Antonio, this means your story will reach millions of animals and people," said the minister during the launch ceremony. "It means the story of courage and hope will keep saving lives even after all of us are gone," replied Antonio, moved. That night, Gabriel asked a question that took Antonio by surprise. "Dad, do you still get sad thinking about the time before you found courage and hope?" "No, son. That sadness brought me here. If I hadn't gone through it, maybe I wouldn't appreciate the happiness we have today enough." "So is it sometimes good to be sad? Sometimes sadness teaches us to recognize joy when it arrives, and it teaches us to take better care of the people we love." Gabriel thought about the answer for a moment and then smiled. "So courage and hope were sad first, but then they brought joy to everyone." "Exactly, son. They transformed their own pain into love for other people." Little by little, Gabriel was understanding the deeper lessons of the family story, and Antonio knew that when the time came, his son would be ready to continue the mission. 30 years after the rescue at the reservoir, Antonio was diagnosed with a heart condition that would require changes to his lifestyle. It wasn't serious, but it served as a reminder that life is precious and finite. "Doctor, how much time do I have?" he asked directly. "Antonio, with proper care, you can live comfortably for many years, but you need to slow down your work pace." "I understand." The news made him reflect on legacies and continuity. Gabriel, at 14, already showed surprising maturity and a genuine passion for social work. Sophia, his youngest daughter at 5, was a cheerful child who talked to animals as if they understood her perfectly. "Marina, I need to start teaching Gabriel how to manage all this," he said one night. "Do you think he's ready?" "I think he was born ready. He just needs guidance and experience." Gabriel accepted the responsibility with impressive seriousness for his age. He began attending all the administrative meetings and accompanying his father on consulting trips. "Dad, how do you manage to remember so many details about every animal you've ever helped?" he asked during a trip. "Because each one of them has a special story, son, and when you truly care about someone, you never forget their story." During these trips, Antonio passed on not just technical knowledge, but the values he had learned from Courage, Hope, and Adelaide. Gabriel absorbed everything with the hunger for knowledge, characteristic of passionate young people. It was during a visit to the cemetery where Adelaide, Courage, and Hope were buried that Gabriel made an important discovery. "Dad, I found something here." Among the flowers on Adelaide's grave was a small metal plaque, rusted by time. When Antonio cleaned it, he could read the inscription, "For Antonio, who taught me it's never too late to start over. With eternal love, Adelaide." "She left this here?" asked Gabriel. "She must have asked someone to place it after she was gone." "What does it mean?" "It means that true love keeps taking care of us, even when the person is no longer here." The discovery of the plaque moved the whole family and reinforced the feeling that they were always being cared for and guided by those who had passed away. At 65, Antonio decided to officially retire from administrative activities, passing the general coordination to Gabriel, now 19 and a graduate in veterinary medicine. "Son, are you sure you want to take on this responsibility so young?" "Dad, I grew up watching you transform lives. I can't imagine doing anything else." "And you, Sophia, do you want to follow the same path?" Sophia, now 10, had a surprising answer. "I want to be a vet like Gabby, but I also want to be a writer. I want to write stories about animals that help people." "What a beautiful idea, daughter. I'll start with the story of Courage and Hope, but it will be a special book, one that children can understand." Sophia's idea excited the whole family. Marina, who had become a psychologist specializing in animal-assisted therapy, offered to help with the technical part of the book. The children's book, Courage and Hope, A Story of True Love, was published 2 years later and became a national success. At 12 years old, Sophia donated all the book royalties to the city's adoption programs. "Sophia, why did you decide to donate the book money?" a journalist asked during the launch. "Because Courage and Hope never wanted money. They only wanted love, and love isn't sold, it's given." The girl's answer went viral on social media and turned the book into a publishing phenomenon. Schools across Brazil began using the story as an educational tool to teach values of compassion and social responsibility. 40 years after the rescue at the reservoir, the story of Courage and Hope had become an urban legend in São José dos Campos. University students from around the world visited the city to study the Brazilian model of social transformation through animal care. Antonio, now 70, still lived in the same house, now turned into a small museum that told the complete story of the journey. Gabriel ran a social empire that benefited over 100,000 animals per year across the country. Sophia, at 17, had become a respected young author, with 3 published books about true stories of overcoming adversity involving animals. Her books were translated into several languages and used in international educational programs. "Grandpa Antonio," Sophia said one afternoon, she always called him that even though he was her father, "do you realize the scale of what you've built?" "I didn't build it alone, my dear. I had help from many special people. But you were the one who had the courage to stop and listen when Courage asked for help. Anyone would have done the same." "No, Grandpa. That's what makes you special. You think anyone would do the same. But that's not true. You are special, and you need to accept that." Sophia's observation made him reflect. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps his excessive humility kept him from recognizing his own worth. It was on a sunny spring morning, exactly 45 years after the rescue at the reservoir, that Antonio received a special call. "Mr. Antonio, this is the Planalto Palace calling. The President would like to award you the National Order of Merit." Order of Merit. It is the highest civilian honor in the country. You will be recognized as a national hero for your services to Brazilian society. The ceremony took place in Brasilia, with the whole family present. Antonio walked onto the stage at the Planalto Palace, carrying a photo of courage and hope, and a small urn with soil from both of their graves. "Mr. President," Antonio said during his acceptance speech, "this honor is not mine. It belongs to two dogs who taught me that true heroes are those who never give up on the ones they love." "Mr. Antonio, you built the largest social transformation program in Latin America. How can you not accept the credit for that?" "Because I simply followed the example I was given. A puppy taught me to have courage. A dog taught me to have hope. A lady taught me to have love. I just passed on what I received." The president was visibly moved by Antonio's humility. "Mr. Antonio, you are an example of what Brazil needs. What message would you leave for the young people watching us? That they pay attention to the calls for help around them, that they have the courage to stop and help, that they never underestimate the power of a small gesture made with true love." The ceremony was broadcast nationwide and sparked a wave of inspiration among Brazilian youth. Hundreds of social projects were created in the following months, all inspired by the story of courage and hope. Back in São José dos Campos, Antonio found a surprise waiting. A bronze statue of courage and hope had been installed in the city's central square, with a plaque that read, "In honor of the four-legged heroes who taught us the true meaning of love." "Dad, what do you think?" asked Gabriel, who had coordinated the surprise. "I think they would be proud," replied Antonio, with tears in his eyes. 15 years later, at 85 years old, Antonio was on the porch of his house, watching his grandchildren play in the backyard. Gabriel had married and had 2 children, Pedro and Ana, who showed the same passion for animals as the previous generations. Sophia, now an internationally recognized writer, was married to a veterinarian and had a daughter, Adelaide, named after the great matriarch of the family. "Great-grandpa Antonio," said 8-year-old Pedro, "tell the story of courage and hope again." "Aren't you tired of that story, boy?" "Never. It's the most beautiful story in the world." Antonio smiled and began once more the tale he had told thousands of times over the years, but each time he told it, he discovered new details, new lessons, new reasons to be moved. "Once upon a time there was a very sad man who had lost everything in life," he began. "Until one day a brave puppy asked for his help to save its mother. The children listened attentively, as if it were the first time, asking questions and getting emotional at the right moments. Ana, 5 years old, always cried when he told about Hope's injuries. "Great-grandpa, did Hope hurt a lot?" she asked. "It did hurt, my dear. But she knew she had a brave puppy who would go get help. The love she felt for courage was stronger than the pain. Just like the love you feel for us? Exactly the same, my granddaughter." That night, after the children went to sleep, Antonio took his usual walk to the cemetery. At 85, he walked more slowly, but he still made a point of visiting the graves of Adelaide, Courage and Hope at least twice a week. "Everyone," he said, sitting on a bench near the graves, "today marks 50 years since that day at the pond. 50 years. A gentle breeze swayed the flowers he always kept fresh on the graves. "I wanted you to know that I never forgot the lessons you taught me. Courage, you taught me to be brave even when afraid. Hope, you taught me that it's always worth fighting. Adelaide, you taught me that true love is unconditional." The silence of the cemetery was filled by the sound of crickets and the wind in the trees. "And I wanted you to know that our family keeps growing, that the values you taught me are being passed to the next generation. Pedro wants to be a veterinarian. Ana wants to run an animal shelter. Adelaide can't even speak properly yet, but she already talks to the dogs as if they would answer." Antonio stayed silent for a few minutes, just feeling the spiritual presence of his loved ones. "Thank you," he finally whispered. "Thank you for teaching me that life is worth living when it's lived with love." During the walk back home, Antonio felt a deep peace. His life had been full, filled with purpose and love. He had transformed his own pain into an instrument of healing for thousands of other people. 6 months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Antonio did not wake up. He passed away in his sleep, with a serene smile on his face as if he were dreaming of courage and hope. The wake lasted 3 days, with people arriving from all over Brazil and even from abroad to pay their last respects. The President of the Republic declared official mourning, and the statue in the square was covered in flowers. Antonio Ferreira taught us that greatness is not in what we accumulate, but in what we give, said the mayor during the ceremony. He took 2 abandoned dogs and turned that into the greatest movement of love in our history. Gabriel, now 55 years old, gave the final speech. My father always said he wasn't a hero, that he just did what anyone would do. Perhaps that's exactly what made him special. He saw the possibility of heroism in every person. Sophia read a poem she had written especially for the occasion. There was a man who heard a bark and stopped to see what it was. He found 2 lost dogs and a whole new life. Courage taught him to be strong. Hope taught him to dream. Adelaide taught him that death cannot end love. Today he leaves to meet them, after 50 years of waiting. The family is finally complete, united for all eternity. The burial took place beside the graves of Adelaide, Courage, and Hope, finally reuniting the family that had changed the world with small gestures of love. End of story. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of this extraordinary story that taught us about courage, hope, and unconditional love. Antonio Ferreira showed us that true heroes aren't born ready, but are made through small acts of kindness repeated every day. The story of courage and hope lives on through the generations they inspired. Pedro, Anna, and little Adelaide grew up hearing these tales and carry in their hearts the values passed down through one man's love for 2 abandoned dogs. Today, the municipal center of São José dos Campos is a complex covering 20 hectares and has helped over 500,000 animals find families. Casa Adelaide has housed more than 2,000 people in vulnerable situations, offering not just a roof, but a chance to rebuild their dignity. The model created by Antonio is present in over 500 Brazilian cities and has been adapted in 12 countries. Millions of lives have been transformed because one day, many years ago, a brave puppy didn't give up asking for help to save his mother. Gabriel continues to manage the social empire built by his father, always remembering that greatness lies in serving, not in being served. Sophia became one of the country's most respected writers, using her stories to spread messages of love and compassion. The statue of courage and hope in the central square of São José dos Campos receives thousands of visitors every year. Children draw pictures, adults leave flowers, and everyone leaves a little more hopeful about human nature. Because this story teaches us that we all have the capacity to make a difference, that a small gesture of love can create ripples that spread for generations. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do what's right despite the fear. And that hope isn't just waiting for things to get better, but actively working to make them better. It's believing that it's always possible to start over, always possible to heal, always possible to love again. Antonio Ferreira's legacy teaches us that family isn't just those who share our blood, but those who share our dreams. That true love is the kind that grows when it's shared, and that life's greatest treasures are the relationships we build based on mutual care and respect. The story began with a broken man who found 2 injured dogs. It ended with a giant family spread across the world, united by the values of compassion, courage, and hope. And this family keeps growing every time someone decides to stop and help someone in need. Because deep down, we're all a bit like that desperate puppy asking for help. We all need someone with the courage to stop, look, and lend a hand. And we all have the capacity to be that person for someone. The greatest lesson from courage and hope is that love multiplied never diminishes. That kindness invested always yields interest. And that small gestures, when made with a sincere heart, can literally change the world. So the next time you hear a bark asking for help, whether from a person, an animal, or a situation that touches your heart, remember Antonio Ferreira. Remember that heroes are ordinary people who decide to do extraordinary things out of love, remember that your story can also be one of transformation, that you too have the power to create ripples of kindness that will spread far beyond what you can see, and that the world is always waiting for more people brave enough to believe in hope. Now tell us, what did you think of this story? What lessons did it bring to your own life? Have you ever had the chance to be someone's Antonio, or has someone been your Antonio when you needed it most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like if this story touched your heart. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories that can inspire and transform the way you see the world.